The Diary of Judas Iscariot, How to Keep Jesus at Arm's Length, written and read by Owen Batstone. Printed by the Christian Publishing House. Preface. While this book is based on real characters and events, the prologue and diary entries are almost entirely fiction. My intent in writing a treatise on Judas Iscariot is twofold. First, to help bring the reader out of the miserable state of not knowing Jesus Christ and into saving faith. Second, to deepen the Christian's appreciation of the truth behind John Bradford's famous words, "There, but for the grace of God, go I." Owen Batstone. Prologue. Between 1946 and 1956, several scrolls containing biblical texts and other ancient writings were discovered in caves about 2 kilometers from the Dead Sea, from which they now derive their name. Their retrieval triggered significant growth in Middle Eastern excavation projects, which have since extended beyond the original Qumran area. In June 1985, one such project was undertaken by the British Antiquities Volunteers, BAV, at a plot of rocky land where the Kidron and Hinnom valleys meet near the eastern side of Old Jerusalem. That year, many hundreds of, mostly redundant, small finds were recovered in the Judean desert, but none of such significance as a handful of scrolls retrieved from a buried Roman satchel, presumed stolen, at this site. This codex was comprised of thin leaves of wood, rolled up papyrus, and parchment glued together as like a modern accordion, and was quickly shipped to the Small Finds Laboratory, Ogmore Vale, UK, after a local man translated one of the covering page's thick dark words as Iscariot. Since their discovery, the scrolls have been examined by a number of scholars, all experts in their respective fields. Disputes over dating, authenticity and translation delayed publication, but these have finally been resolved, and this year BAV was afforded the privilege of introducing to the world what has come to be known as the Diary of Judas Iscariot. The chronology of the diary runs in accordance with the much-referenced teachings of the rabbi, and with the author's apparent mental and spiritual decline. This particular edition also includes a Bible referencing system. The precise date of the 3 years covered could not be agreed and are thus termed seasons, not years. Finally, as it is the editor's desire for this publication to reach as many people of all ages as possible, most, if not all, of the colloquial obscenities towards the disciples and their teacher have been removed. Blessings to all. Saeed Samara, CEO, British Antiquities Volunteers. First Season. Diary Entry 1. I've heard a thing or two about a certain man. He sounds insightful, clever, an enabler of sorts. People say there's a vibrancy about him and his religion which distinguishes him from nearly everybody else in his field. His supporters are an ardent bunch and have brought his stories as far south as here. They comprise mainly of those which others tend to call the dissatisfied few. A minority of people who have for a while now complained that their rabbis offer nothing more than doctrine and ethics. They want more from their religion, they say. They want their hearts engaged and their affections stirred. I, like most of my countrymen, find this talk rather fanatical, but it's these enthusiasts that say they found something special in him. I wonder what his opinions would be on more relevant topics. Maybe he'd even give me a platform to say a word or two about mine. And so I'd like to meet him, and he me, I'm sure. Latest sightings have him in the north of the country, and so I'll set off to find him tomorrow. As I've not really travelled before, I'll pen this little journal along the way. Entry 2. One entry, one mistake. I ought to have started with some basics in case I misplace this journal and someone needs to return it. I'm Judas of Kerioth. That's Kerioth Hezron, not Kerioth Moab, thankfully. The latter has far too lively a history for this place. The prophet Jeremiah never had much cause to mention us. Drop 20 miles south of Jerusalem, where I think I'm heading, to a smattering of small farming hamlets strewn together by fields as bland as the occupants, and that's Kerioth. My name is the Greek form of Judah, which means Jehovah leads. That's mother and father for you, Jewish, faithful, a touch naive. Sound in their religious doctrines, but sound asleep to the modern world and its ideas. If anything, Jehovah did lead my parents to lose themselves and all their sense of pride and independence. I think it's better to find oneself rather than lose oneself. As for education, I would pay people to handle my schoolwork in order to free me up for more pressing issues like chasing real money, and found I was mostly passed about between rabbis who made no allowance for this type of forward thinking. I'm positive the rabbi I currently seek will be somewhat different and reward me exactly as I deserve. Brackets, Jeremiah 48, verse 24 and 41. Entry 3. I'm heading northeast now, just crossed the Jordan River. Local sightings and reports of him are swelling. The adjectives son and baptizer are often used. Baptizer arose because of a more recent incident whereby he drew a large number of people away from another baptizer named John. I remember John. He once visited Kerioth and tried to convert people to his rather invasive, experience-based religion. Whilst I found myself agreeing with him in part that many of our pretentious residents were guilty of what John called sin, I was offended by his dispassion towards people like myself, whose errors in life are not so much caused by sinful hearts, but by what I might call character complexities or slight twists of our natures. Needless to say, most people found his message to be as base as his clothing, and he left Kerioth pretty much as he arrived, a loner, though I'm sure he didn't mind. And I can quite believe the fresh reports I've heard that when his listeners left him to follow this second baptizer, this son, he looked almost happy to see them go. The term son was given him because he claims that he has a loving father who has given all things into his hands, an inheritance of all things. The potential here for me is endless. Brackets, John 3, verse 22 to 36. Entry 4. His name, I have learned, is Jesus. Jesus means Saviour, and while that provokes some thought, I'll keep with calling him Rabbi for now. I learned his name from a stocky, bulbous-nosed resident of Sychar who was travelling about telling anyone he could find that nearly all of his friends have come to believe on Jesus because, let me steady my hand, he drank water in public with a promiscuous Samaritan woman and convinced her that he is the Messiah. I'm very encouraged at this news. If he met with a woman like that, he'll be honoured to meet with a man like me. Brackets, John 4, verse 1 to 42. Entry 5. Diary. I have found him. He was standing in a bustling crowd near the Sea of Galilee. It was a brief but unforgettable experience. As soon as I arrived, his eyes were waiting to meet with mine. They were wide and paused with caution, and prayers seemed to be springing up at me from their corners. We lingered for a moment, staring, sharing in a sense of purpose mingled with pain. Entry 6. Unfortunately, the last few days have seen me gobbled up by this rather unhinged group of followers, but more on them later. For now, I am focused on piecing together the fragments of a breaking story. News has reached us that John the Baptizer has been imprisoned for meddling in the affairs, quite literally, of Herod Antipas. Does he value his ideology more than his well-being? In the likely event that the evidence of the Herod family's raving lunacy becomes so vast that I start to forget them, I'll jot a few of them on record. Antipas's father is Tetrarch of Galilee and sometimes called the Great. I'd readily agree with this title if the Great preceded terms like serial adulterer, builder of palatial vanity projects, paranoid, jealous, wife murderer, and committer of infanticide. His son, Herod Antipas, is another law unto himself and recently stole his half-brother's wife, Herodias, who also happens to be his niece. Herodias's acts of barbarity deserve an entire column on their own, but I'll conclude by noting that their incestuous union follows Antipas's many counts of promiscuity, warmongery, and fox-like behaviour. And now enters John. John's problem is that he demands his hearers not only to understand the scriptures, but to practice them fully as well. This was exactly how he was many years ago, and I'll give credit here, he perseveres in his beliefs to the very end. He is committed to the idea that his religious system can change a person's nature. In reality, however, Herod's insatiable lust is an affection grafted so deep within him it could only be curtailed if a greater affection were to displace it. In this case, because his desire is for a person, then John's only hope of successfully converting him would be to offer him a God who is also a person, and a person more altogether lovely than the one he loves at present. John's God has to be something more than a mere methodical deduction from an ancient text, or his hearers' affections will remain as dead as he's about to be. Brackets. Matthew 14, verse 3 to 5. Luke 3, verse 19 to 20. Luke 13, verse 32.